All right, I think things are tapering off with folks joining. We may have a few more, but we don't want to miss a single moment of time with our very illustrious guest, Dr. Russ Glasgow. So welcome everyone to the Implementation Science Beachside Chat, hosted by the UCLA Rapid, Rigorous, Relevant Implementation Science Hub, which is actually named after Russ's work. So it's a very nice connection for us to spend our final session with the namesake of our hub. I lead the Implementation Science Hub, and I'm very happy to be joined today by Dr. Chun-Ching Lin, who is one of our co-investigators and my co-host for the Beachside Chat. So welcome, Chun-Ching, and thank you also to Elena for, as always, making this happen and making our lives easier in many, many ways. So thanks, Elena. And I think we will get going today. So welcome, everyone. It is my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Russ Glasgow. Do you want to go to the next slide, Chun-Ching? Dr. Glasgow is one of our expert consultants for the Hub. I'm guessing that most of you know that he is the pioneer of the Ream framework, as well as many, many other significant contributions to implementation science that were made even before there was a field of implementation science. A lot of this happened pre-implementation science and has made its way very successfully into this field. So Dr. Glasgow is a research professor in the Department of Family Medicine at University of Colorado School of Medicine, and he also directs the dissemination and implementation science program of Accords. There are many wonderful things that Russ is doing that are listed on a slide with resources that we will take a look at a little bit later in our session today. So for everyone who is new to our format, this is a chat. I have some questions that I would love to ask Russ, and so does Chun-Ching, but you all are also welcome to ask questions in the chat, which is preferred, but if you put them in the Q&A, we'll see them there too, so don't hesitate to bring your questions in, and we want to be able to take as many questions as we can in the time that we have. We're going to do a couple of quick poll questions that are not going to stay in PowerPoint. We're going to just talk in Zoom, and then we'll come back to the slides a little bit later in the session. We've got some great resources, references for you, and that's how we'll tie up the session at the end. For those of you who are back for another Beachside Chat, thank you for coming back. We've had a lot of fun doing these, and we really look forward to being able to continue them should our hub be renewed. So just to get, a quick hello from you, Russ, and then we will turn to the poll questions.
Well, it's my pleasure to be with you today. I'm really looking forward to this. It's a pleasant change from, doing the usual boring PowerPoint slide dog and pony show. So it's great. My only regret is that I can't be with you there in person in this lovely venue view that we have.
Yes, we all wish that we could be on the beach together, but we can imagine that we're there. Keep it in our mind's eye. So thanks again for being here with us. So we'll just do these couple of quick polls just to get a feel for who all is with us today, and then we will start chatting.
Okay, so our first poll question is, do you primarily work in academia, government, nonprofit, industry, or others? Okay. Well, 71% working in academia, 27% in government, 2% nonprofit. Okay,
Great,
let's go to second poll question. How familiar are you with Ream? would you say are very familiar, somewhat familiar, not very familiar, or I don't know what it is? Okay, almost half of the participants are somewhat familiar, and about 1/3 very familiar, and 16% not very familiar, and 9% I don't know what it is.
I love it. So glad that there's such a range. That is very helpful for us, actually.
It is. And challenging.
Yes.
Okay, last full question. How familiar are you with how Ream and PRISM, pragmatic, robust implementation and sustainability model fits together? Are you very familiar, somewhat familiar, not very familiar, or I don't know what it is? Is that to see a wider range?
Yes.
Wow. Yeah, so half of the audience mentioned not very familiar with this two model fit together, and 27% don't know what it is, and 70% somewhat familiar, and 7% very familiar.
Great. Thank you so much, Chen-Ching and Elena.
Okay.
That is very helpful. And I'm glad to say that that is one of our chatting questions today, is about the marriage of Ream and PRISM. So we will get there. So thanks everyone for participating in the poll. I think it would be helpful just to talk briefly about, the lay of the land of your work. You've done so much, so it's probably hard to put that in a nutshell, but I've been thinking a lot about how we represent our work to people who, might not be in our fields. And when you think about when someone says, "Oh, what do you do?" and they're on the elevator or something like that, how do you describe what it is that you do?
That's a good question to start with. It could be one of the many stumper questions that you'll have, Allison, because I'm still working on it. I don't have a very good, concise answer that it doesn't sound too wonky or just confuse people. I'll usually say something like, I'm a health services researcher that focuses on translating research into practice.
Mhm.
I'm trained as a clinical psychologist, but I've learned you don't want to say that to start with people or think you're going to analyze them or something. And I'm still working on it. I was completely unsuccessful while my parents were alive at ever getting explained to them what it was I did. So it's kind of a life's work, I guess. Going just a bit further and maybe thinking about Ream a little bit more, I'll say, if there's any interest or their eyes don't glaze over after I say that first thing, I'll say something like, I try to work on practical ways to kind of improve the delivery of either clinical or community services and study or evaluate that.
I think that sounds really good. I do. But it's funny how we constantly have to work on this presentation of self for the stuff that we do. I get the glazed over when I say, well, I'm an anthropologist, and people are like, so bones or something like that? Not quite. So our topic for today is, of course, Ream, and we're thinking about past, present, and future. And so I was super curious to just get us going with, looking back when you first designed this 20 years, more than 20 years ago now. I mean, did you have any idea that you were onto something that would, have this impact, that would, find its way into a whole field of work that was able to really capitalize on these concepts? I mean, what did you think when you first put this all together?
Well, the short answer is no. I had some hope that there could be an influence to kind of, if not rectify, at least address what my colleagues and I at first developed Ream. And again, for those of you that aren't familiar, didn't catch what Allison said, this literally was at the turn of the century, way back there. And it was before. We didn't use the term. I think we were doing some of the same things, but we didn't use the term implementation science. But I viewed it more from, I started out in health behavior change. And from that perspective, there was an almost exclusive focus on two things. One, on individual level behavior change, and secondly, on efficacy studies. And these were close to reified. It's kind of hard for some of you that are younger maybe to fully appreciate it, but like that was considered the type of science, and anybody, and this really drive towards internal validity was everything. So one of the purposes of Ream initially, and it has continued, was to try and achieve more of a balance between internal validity and external validity. And it's not to say, sometimes I think I maybe come on too strong, or people interpret it as saying internal validity is not important. And I don't mean that, but that there needs to be, more of a balance and more of a focus looking ahead for public health impact and the various dimensions of Ream. I think we have one slide later that I can go over for those of you that aren't familiar, but we're intended to address some multi-level issues that, at least at that time, and a little less so today, but still true somewhat, I think, often aren't addressed, but that are critically important to produce some population or public health impact. Mm-hmm. So it was to try and refocus attention. I was surprised initially, both positively and negatively in some cases, about what happened. It took a long time for really it to, I don't know if it was 17 years, maybe not quite, but a while to make an indent. But it was interesting to me, and maybe you have some thoughts, Allison, about why or how, but from a sociological or a social network perspective, where it took off and where it didn't, and some places even where there was moderately active resistance. Mm-hmm. The two places that it initially seemed to have some traction were, one, health behavior change. I mean, part of that was the circles at that time that I worked in. Psychologists and other folks working on prevention, weight loss, smoking cessation, that thing. And then secondly, and maybe because of where we published early on, in the public health community. And I think maybe because of the focus on this larger level impact and where we were going, it appealed to that group. But it did then take quite a while before it kind of made its way more broadly.
Well, and it seems to me, thinking back a couple of decades ago, as much as I can, that it was the move toward thinking about organizational change. That at one point, Ream was one of the only frameworks on the market for thinking about organizational change, and just to witness and be part of the. I mean, proliferation isn't even a strong enough word to talk about how many frameworks have grown, and models and theories, and we have whole websites dedicated to helping us figure out what to choose. Yeah. It's been remarkable, just the growth and the sophistication of thinking that's gone into how do we, in some ways translate our understanding of individual behavior change to organizational change, mm-hmm. and in some ways conceptualize organizational change in quite different ways than we think about individual change. And it's amazing to see now that it's not only about, what model do we choose, but how do we combine models? How do we think about them together? And I know that that's a lot of the work that you've been doing more recently. I know in a couple of proposals I've been working on, we're using the combined Ream Prism mm-hmm. model. And I think, given what we've seen about folks' familiarity with not only Ream, but with the combination, and with just this issue of combining models and frameworks in general, maybe we can go there a little bit and talk through that.
Yeah, that'll be fun. We have like 3 hours left, I think.
Yep. I am very happy to spend my afternoon talking about this and not writing grants, but
let me just make one other comment about what you said early on by way of introduction, and then I'll talk about maybe the general issue of combining, or I'd like to broaden it to combining or adapting models, and then maybe PRISM and Ream specifically, since I wasn't surprised at that poll that many people don't quite get that. And to be honest, I guess it's still a work in progress for us too, at a real detailed level. But to go back to what you talked about before at the organizational level, or in general, I certainly agree with that. And also, I'm a really strong believer, in the socio-ecological model or the pyramid. And that's been one issue that we've tried to address a bit in some publications going back almost 15 years, but really Ream is explicitly intended to be multi-level, but not to stop just at the organizational level. In fact, I often say it has to look at, if you will, the delivery agent or the practitioner, and often there's a couple different levels there. Then there's the more proximal, what often we call now inner setting, the specific, clinic or work site or school. Then there's the broader system. Then there's either the regional, but policy level and things. And Ream does work. Sometimes it's not as straightforward, but it does work at all of those levels. And I think sometimes that's the challenging thing. Realize that in any paper or often any study, you can't do all those levels. But conceptually, it's just really important to think through that, I think, as well as what Ream outcomes are most important, or do you want to prioritize given your question, given the state of the science? More generally, I do think it's pretty important to, not sure what the adjective I'm looking for is, skillfully or sometimes cautiously combine or adapt models. Certainly the last thing we need, willing to be convinced otherwise, but I think the last thing we need is yet another. I think the last I saw was 137 models or something. You may know, Allison, or have another update better than I do. But on the other hand, I don't know that I've ever seen one model, including Ream, that fits perfectly, for a particular problem in a particular context and things to do that. So then I think many of us do think about combining models, and there's a lot of exciting things there, including probably the most recent is trying to combine health equity models with D&I models, including some people are, including us a bit, are working on that with Ream. But I also think adapting the model is equally important. And that is using the same things, maybe where we don't purposely bring in 2 or 3 different models, but we just think about kind of what's missing. And often I'll see something like 90%'s there. But what else can we do? And it might or might not be another formal model or construct that we have. It might even just be another point that stakeholders, bring out or something in our experience. So it's adding to it there. When we do combine models, I just have a couple thoughts, and I'd love to continue this and see either the participants or your thoughts on this. Allison, but I think we need to be a bit careful and think about how do these different models align, and and what do we get? What's the incremental value by adding another one? Is it another level that more explains something, like a policy level? Probably does a better job if that's the issue, rather than just Ream, although it can be cobbled together. Can it be used, like the most common example, to my knowledge, with Ream, is to combine to use CIFAR as a more determinants framework and Ream as an outcomes framework. I think that's worked fairly successfully. That certainly isn't the only way. that it can be used. And we increasingly, and maybe with a bit of hubris, tend to think that Ream can be, and I think we have some evidence of this, be used more broadly for a variety of things. Almost, at least contextually, it can be used with PRISM. It can definitely be used for planning stages, not just for evaluating at the end. We're doing some work that I'm maybe most excited about now, using Ream iteratively, doing a phase there. So it's more than just an evaluation or an outcomes framework. Last thing I'll say now, probably forgotten three other things, or we can make this more interactive, so I just don't ramble on and on. But I've been fortunate to work with Borsika Rabin, Ross Brownson, Rachel Tabak, and some others on a website, Theories, Models, Framework website that some of you are probably familiar with. That's just simply dissemination-implementation.org, that addresses this issue specifically. We started out, I forget how many years ago it was originated, but to help people select a model. And they would just go in and enter some information about the key constructs or factors they were interested in, and then it would help you select like the 4 or 5 models that had the most of those constructs. Well, now, because of what I just talked about, as well as the proliferation in the field and the expansion, we've also tried to provide some specific guidance. When you get several different models, it kind of returns in this search in decreasing frequency of how many of these constructs that you put did you hit, kind of as algorithm, but then to provide specific guidance and examples about how you might combine different models, or again, this issue of adapting. And then the final thing is to plug the website a little bit more. How might you measure this or carry it through in your project? Not just say in your background section, I'm using this model, but what kind of measures might you use?
Right. The website is amazing. I am happy to plug it too. I use it a lot because it helps you, there's just too much to stay up to date with. And I've been so pleasantly surprised when I put in different constructs and see models I've never even heard of, but then I look at them and they're amazing. And so it is, it must have been and must continue to be quite a labor of love, because I can't even imagine the amount of work it took to build it and to make it do what it does. But I really encourage everyone to check it out if you haven't, even if you feel like you're an expert in all the models, theories, and frameworks. There's just so much, you can do just playing in there. We have some amazing questions in the chat that I think you'll really enjoy, Russ. So Eric has said, I'd love to hear about the motivation behind the 2019 update to PRISM Ream to include a fit interactions construct and an overarching issues construct beyond the PRISM external internal contexts.
Okay.
That was in your 20-year review paper.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let me address part of that, and then feel free to come back, or we can take that different places. First of all, I would say both that paper and then one that I believe we have a reference to that is available online now as a preprint in Journal of Clinical and Translational Science, were really addressed to do two things. One, to try and summarize the evolution of Ream, because it has evolved, I think, fortunately, maybe that's why it's still here. It's maybe adapted a bit and evolved over time. Some people tend to still cite only the original publication and things. And I think from that comes the notion that Ream is very limited and it's only like a post hoc evaluation. So part of it was just to show how it's evolved, expanded, what stayed the same, and if you will, stood the test of time, and what we've added or hopefully enhanced the focus on. I'll be glad to go in more detail if the group would like. But secondly, we do find, and I don't think, in fact, I'm pretty sure this is not unique to Ream, is that there have been I think, unintentional, but mischaracterizations of Ream. And maybe we found that, particularly this last article, it's our attempt, as well as some things on our website, to try and provide some clarification, some better examples, and things like that. Because there are a number, I've mentioned a few of them already, that where Ream, hasn't been, people haven't fully grasped it, or I think we need to own this. We haven't fully explained its use and purposes and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that paper, which is cited on a slide, which we'll show just a little bit, I think it's 13 misperceptions or
Yes.
alternate ideas about what Ream does.
Right.
And it's so nicely done by Jody Haltrop and your whole team of co-authors. I found it incredibly useful to really think through even some misconceptions I had, just the breadth of work that's been done, the different ways that it's been used. So really recommend folks taking a look at that paper as well, and we'll come back to that shortly. There is another question kind of related to the Ream Prism connection from Dennis. Dennis mentioned that many folks use CFIR and Ream together, but I see many similarities between CFIR and Prism, which seems more aligned to Ream. I've been very curious about how Prism and CFIR overlap and don't overlap. Would you be able to speak to that?
Yeah. Can I combine with my own question? Given that a substantial amount of audience has not very familiar with Prism and Ream, can you also talk about how Prism and Ream differ and overlap with each other? And to my understanding, Prism is more related to the qualitative assessment of contextual factors across the life cycle of intervention. Is that correct?
Generally. By the way, this is one of the reasons I'm delighted to talk with you, because this is a work in progress, and one of the key areas that we haven't yet successfully communicated. We're working on a number of things, so I'm hopeful in 2 years from now that this will become much clearer. I'll try and come back to Dennis's questions about CFIR and Prism, but let me address the latter one about Ream and Prism first. That's a little easier, and then we'll come back. Help me remember the other aspects of this. But we realized early on that we couldn't focus only on outcomes. And that was, the original Ream outcomes, which, by the way, most of you are probably more familiar with the Nola Proctor et al. Notion of implementation outcomes. These do map on fairly well to those. In fact, there's a nice chapter in the Brownson et al. Book doing the crosswalk. But we also realized it was important to have some understanding of what factors are related to these outcomes. And so this was some work back in 2008, I believe. I was doing a fair amount of work in the Kaiser Permanente system, and we had a program project working with programs that were intervening in a variety of different settings for a variety of different cancer control and prevention alternatives. But Adrian and I thought it would be nice to have a pragmatic, and that's the P in Prism. I should maybe say, first of all, Prism is a somewhat grandiose or overstated acronym for pragmatic, robust, we can talk about that, implementation, and then importantly, sustainability model is what Prism stands for. But the notion was to address context, as you very correctly pointed out. I think that's the key thing that Prism does. At the current time, you're also right on target, is our assessments of Prism contextual factors have really been, at least all that we've published, have been qualitative. We're actively working now Might be some people even on this call that are part of that on some more survey type items. But I feel at the current state of our knowledge anyway, it's best approached qualitatively. But the bottom line is that these are factors that we feel are really important when combined with an intervention and a set of implementation strategies, will determine Ream outcomes. It has a lot of overlap with CFR, or I would say, probably making this up, but maybe 2/3 to 3/4 overlap with most models of context that I'm aware of anyway. And I think sometimes we need to celebrate that and drive that home when we're talking with non-implementation scientists too. I think otherwise people can come away, they read this thing over 100 different models and they think it's a Tower of Babel and we don't know anything, that we're talking about. So I think that focus on what is common, and a lot of this is inner and outer context, the characteristics, I think, of both the recipients and the, if you will, the intervention agents there. One thing that I think is maybe a bit unique about Ream, or at least more explicit, I should say, is a factor that we call the implementation and sustainability infrastructure. And what we mean by that are specific things that are in place in a setting that will, one, provide ongoing, since it says sustainability, an ongoing focus, an ongoing priority, ongoing resources, ongoing expectations, so it's somebody's job, particularly so there's something like an audit and feedback system set up there. And I think that's at least maybe called out more. And one of the key things about PRISM that is there. But that said, there is a whole lot of overlap. And I guess the main thing that I would say about CFR, again, apologize for rambling here, just cut me off at any time, Allison. I can get on, a hobby horse and go forever, is that we tried to make it a little more focused. The wonderful thing about CFR, from my perspective, and also the most challenging thing, is it kind of covers everything, as well as the original Greenhalgh's, model that it pretty much built on. And that was the attempt. And I think that has a lot to say for it and help us think about it. And at the same time, it can also almost be overwhelming. And I don't know I've ever seen anybody comprehensively addressed in a single study, all CFR. So Ream and PRISM together focus on some key issues. And I think it's simpler for better or for worse that way. And it focuses on some key areas. Last thing about how they fit together is it really is a combined model now. And honestly, if you say you use PRISM, technically, if you look at the publications or our figures, PRISM combines the contextual factors with the Ream outcomes. So actually, Ream is a component of PRISM. They are one together. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't use, quite legitimately, just the Ream outcomes, or even just the more contextual aspects of PRISM. You can do that, but we're still struggling, did maybe a better job in this paper that we've just been talking about than we have before, but to note how it works together. And we played around with even talking about an expanded Ream model or something like that. But that is the notion, is they really are one that PRISM is an addition to, an extension of Ream, and it uses the Ream outcomes.
That is a huge take home for me, to think about Ream as a component of PRISM. I mean, I remember that the diagram of them reflects that, but I hadn't really thought of it in exactly that way. So that is very powerful. That's very helpful. I think someone also had a hand raised earlier. I think it was Esther, if I saw correctly. It kind of flashed on and off. But if you're there and you wanted to ask a question, please feel free to do so in the chat or the Q&A, or it might have just been a mistake hand raised. So, okay, good. Thank you, Esther. So I have one more question on my, well, I have many questions on my mind, but one more question I thought we could cover today. And then I think it might be helpful to shift back to the slides and take a look at the visual that we were talking about earlier and the sort of cascade model, if that's okay. So going back to the work that you said you all are, there's so many, I think we should stay here for 3 hours, but there you mentioned that you're doing work, I know, with Rachel Shelton, David Chambers, and others in equity, and there are many outstanding efforts going on in the field to really bring issues of health equity and health disparities more front and center in our work and implementation. And I thought that the paper that you all wrote about increasing a focus on equity was really fascinating in a lot of different ways, and particularly in relation to sustainability. It kind of brings me back to what you were saying before about the importance of the S in PRISM. And so I wonder if you could talk a little bit with us about what's that relationship, how are you tying together, consideration of equity, attention to equity, and attention to sustainability?
Yeah. Like everything we've talked about, it's a work in progress. The first thing I should say is it was really fortunate, and I had a great time working with Rachel Shelton. She initiated it, and then a chance to partner with my longtime friend and colleague, David Chambers, too. So it was great to kind of stretch our thinking. And they're probably both have a lot more expertise than I do in this. And I have to say that seeing it's just both really reinforcing and humbling to see all that is pouring out. I'm sure many of you have seen this too, almost weekly, like the new contributions about the interface of implementation science and health equity and what we need to do and what the opportunities are. And just one more tangential plug for what's going to happen in terms of including, I call it Borsica's website, the theories, models, and framework website. There's explicit work going on now to try and integrate health equity frameworks, add those, and look at the interface with implementation science. That'll be a while till we see the products of that, but I think that's one of the many exciting things. To try and more directly answer the question, I think if I had to say in a word, the common mechanism here that drives equity and sustainability and things like that are cost and resources. Yeah. And that means both what's available, but then also how do we design implementation strategies, that can be low enough cost, that can fit in places, particularly low resource settings. I think we have a huge amount to learn from low and middle income countries and things like that it can be more broadly used. So you don't have to be one of the world's leading academic medical centers in order to conduct the intervention. And I think that just drives so much. The other key factor there that I'm sure is blatantly obvious, but just to make it explicit, is stakeholder engagement. I mean, I don't think it's possible to get sustainment if you don't have, and again, I'll come back to this multi-level reframe, if you don't have this multi-level engagement and wisdom. And then the final thing, and the thing that David Chambers brought to this, was the notion on the changing context, the dynamic context from the DSF, the Dynamic Sustainability Framework. So I think working with your stakeholders, keeping cost in mind all throughout and resources that you have at multiple levels, and then being able to think about and be nimble to adapt to the changing construct, I think is the way that they explicitly relate, particularly when focused on populations that have a lot of social needs and social determinants challenges. Mm-hmm. More to come on that. We have another paper that's in process right now that's being led by one of my mentees, Meredith Ford, that we're trying to think through this more deeply.
I think we could have an entire session on how you manage to write so many papers, but that's a whole other topic. I know I said we were going to switch over to the slides, which we will in a moment, but there's a very good question in the Q&A. Gabriella said the chat is amazing. Yay, I agree. And has a question, what could you tell us about the use of Ream to evaluate policies that generally are not evidence-based? Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Well, the notion about what's evidence-based and what isn't is a whole other thing that we could do. But let me just say, I often put together, even though they're certainly different, policies. I think about, Ross Brownson or others have taught us about all the levels, whether there's 7 levels or the different type of big P and little p there. But I guess where I've come into contact the most has been in the notion of guidelines, which I think are a type of policy, maybe a smaller type P, which are increasingly, but still not always, and certainly not solely evidence-based there. I think that many of the same constructs still apply. It's a little more challenging thinking about, if you will, what the denominator is at each of the Ream stages. So at the reach, it's kind of who's the end target recipient? Is that every individual citizen? Is it like all employees in the work site? Mm-hmm. Or is it a subset of those folks that have certain, conditions there? And then there's notion in terms of implementation too. There are different, I've found, both stages of policy implementation going on. And then there's, very importantly, like an initial rollout that's doing it. And then there's a later, often, if you will, quote, enforcement or whatever, following up on the policy. And then there's the issue with many policies, of sunsetting or sustainment or sustainability there too. Quite honestly, this is one of the things that if I had more time, I would have prepared for, because I think it's a great question. But I will refer you back to, we had a paper, I can send it. I didn't cite it today, but I think it was in 2009 or whatever, with Allison Hammerman and colleagues, trying to address this and give a number of examples of using Ream at the policy level to address those issues. But those are a few of the nuances anyway.
Thank you so much. So Chun-Ching, would you mind bringing back up the slide so we can take a look at the Cascade slide?
Done. Okay.
Great. Okay, well, I think this is probably going to blow people's minds. So, and we don't have much time to go through it, but do you want to orient us to what you're thinking about here and kind of what, because this is work in progress as it all is. So
thank you. I will, one bit of context, and then I will try to be uncharacteristically brief. So Allison, you can set a timer and just stop me at 2 minutes as we go through here.
Okay. So I might give you 3.
Okay. First of all, this is new and a work in progress, and I took advantage of this great opportunity to get some of your feedback on it. So you're, to some extent, guinea pigs. This is maybe the beta version of this. This is attempted to do 2 things. It's to kind of show a sequence, but I want to stress from the outset, it's not a linear, a solely linear sequence, but we call this the Ream Cascade. But it kind of shows, and for those of you not familiar with Ream, I particularly appreciate your bearing with us, but you can look underneath each of the, AIREM things, what these are kind of lay definitions are. But the notion is that there's a whole cascade of events, starting with the settings that we do, including which settings are even considered, which are excluded, which participate, and that sort of thing that you're going to get involved. Then it goes down to sequentially when you're starting an implementation, how consistently is that? Then we get down to once you start implementing, including your recruitment, very importantly, about the issues of reach and representativeness. There's a lot of equity issues, particularly there. There's really equity issues all throughout. But the notion is you can see this cascade getting down there. And I have another slide that some of you have probably seen that I used that show if you had a percentage at each of those, and time you get to the bottom, if it's 50% at each of those and you multiply them out, time you get down to the maintenance phase, again, this overall public health impact is fairly minimal. What I added here, but I won't go into, is the text on the right-hand side to the arrows. It comes from this work in progress about thinking about health equity implications of Ream and how Ream can be used. So those are some notions there that we can use to try and increase health equity, or at least minimize health inequities and inadvertent health inequities that are created at each point. But that's the basic notion. And again, it gets a little more faded as you get to the bottom, just to show, this is kind of nice because I hadn't superimposed it on the use. When you get down to the sunset there, over there, it's really kind of faded out because of the reduced impact if we don't attend to these issues. And the last thing I'll say is that there is something positive in here. So many people think I'm just a naysayer and I'm out here to trash all of our research and its impact. But this also, from a glass is half full perspective, shows that all the opportunities that we have that are there, that each stage here is not only, if you will, a drop off in terms of what you get, but it's also an opportunity for us to focus some interventions and some implementation strategies. And from my perspective, unfortunately, as a field, not this group, but in general health services research, we've devoted about 80 to 90 to more % on the effectiveness component and not nearly enough on the other issues.
Mm-hmm. Well, everyone is very fascinated by this from what I'm seeing in the chat. Anna Bauman, Dr. Anna Bauman, who is another one of our expert consultants for the Hub, said she has a lot of questions about this and can't wait to see the paper. I agree. And that's in the works, right?
It is. It is.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. I'm reminded, I don't want to wrap up, but I see we need to soon. But I'm reminded, looking at this, of Lisa Saldana's work as well. Yep. With the stages of implementation completion. And I was just had the privilege of hearing her talk again on Monday and talk about how much action is really in that early adoption or pre-implementation phase. And if things don't really happen there, according to all the data that they've collected with her instrument, you might not even make it to these other stages. And so what I like about this, one, is it's making me think about it differently, but two, to really emphasize the point you just made, all these opportunities that we have in these different stages and between these different stages to make it to the next one, and what strategies can we use, and can we expand our strategies into strategies that really address equity issues, so that maybe that's been the gap, or one of the gaps in making our way across these stages.
That is, you got it. That's one of the implications. And Anna, you might regret what you just said. I'll be back to you on this because of your 10 times greater understanding and expertise on equity issues than I have, certainly. But yeah, this is where we're excited about this, trying to really put our feet to the fire, or try and walk our talk here. Just last segue, since you mentioned Lisa and the sick, also the coins is very relevant to what we're talking about before, which follows on that and is thinking about a costing by looking at the various stages and what cost is there. And that's another huge issue that we try to cover in Ream. Right now it's under implementation, but it actually can be thought about at each of these stages there, that, as I said before, I think is one of the key drivers of sustainability and equity. So I'd refer people to that work also.
Yeah. So I have a question about the implementation stage. So just wondering, because I checked your ream.org website. I find it extremely helpful and a lot of tools, planning tools. And yeah, I noticed that the quantitative tools are under construction. I'm really looking forward to that because the question that I'm struggling the most is how to measure quantitatively measure fidelity and appropriateness of making adaptation towards each subpopulation. So yeah, can you comment on that?
Mhm. Super. I don't know we have any magic for fidelity. We most often use, checklist. Ideally, I think we would do an observational study, but often that's not practical. Whenever possible, I like to do multiple and mixed methods, and particularly to understand from the person receiving the intervention, get their perspective, not just the intervention agent. We're probably the most excited now in work both with Ream and others about the adaptation, as you noticed. We talk about briefly, I didn't describe it here, but implementation consisting of fidelity, adaptation, and the balance or fit between those, and then the cost that we have there. But I think for all of us, again, another area that's totally exploding about adaptations that I'm pretty sure you've talked about in other sessions.
Thank you so much. Great question. I just want to orient everyone to the last couple of slides that we have, just so you know there are some additional resources here for you. I believe the papers, except for the ones that came up in response to our discussion, but a lot of the papers we've touched on are listed here, including that preprint paper in Journal of Clinical and Translational Science, which I highly recommend. I also want to put a strong plug in for Jody's other first author paper about qualitative approaches to the use of Ream. I think this paper, if you are working on the qualitative side of implementation evaluation, it is just a treasure trove of ways of thinking about dimensions of Ream in qualitative ways. So I mean, all of these are amazing. I just happen to use that paper quite frequently. So big shout out to Jody for that. And then we have some resources on the next slide, I believe. So the Ream website, which Chen Cheng just mentioned, the Accords website, other great websites. And as many of you may know, Russ's Accords Center now has a D&I Science Certificate program, which is a really, really amazing program with many of the people Russ has mentioned on faculty supporting this great educational opportunity. So I really don't want to end, but I know people need to move on. I just want to thank you so much for being with us today, Russ. I can actually feel people buzzing with the many things that you've talked about. I am buzzing myself. So thank you so much for taking the time with us. It was an absolute pleasure chatting with you. Hope we can do it again. Thank you, Chen Cheng, for being my co-host and your excellent questions.
Thank you.
Please do complete our evaluation as we go up for renewal. Your feedback would really, really help us. We want to be doing this again and provide more and more Beachside chats in the coming years. So thank you all so much. Have a wonderful long weekend and take good care. Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Really great. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.